Have you ever wondered what lingers in the hallways of a hospital long after visiting hours are over? What if the spirits of those who passed away never truly left? Hospitals are places of healing, but they are also places of death, sorrow, and unfinished business. Some nurses, doctors, and patients have seen things they cannot explain. Figures standing at the ends of hallways, whispers in empty rooms, or patients who disappear without a trace. If you think hospitals are just places for the living, these stories may change your mind. These are real hospital ghost stories. If you're brave enough, read on. But don't be surprised if you start seeing shadows in the corners of your own room tonight. Story 1. The woman in room 306. I used to work the night shift at a large urban hospital. It was an older building, parts of it dating back nearly 100 years. There was one room, room 306, that we all avoided. Nurses would argue over who had to check on it, and new staff quickly learned that something wasn't right about that room. Patients in room 306 would complain about a woman standing at the foot of their bed at night. Some described her as elderly, others as young, but they all said the same thing. She had hollow, sunken eyes and would whisper, "It's not your time." One night I had to check on a patient who had just been transferred to 306. As I walked into the room, the overhead light flickered violently before going out. My heart pounded as I reached for my flashlight. Then I heard it, a whisper. "It's not your time." I turned, and for a split second I saw her. A pale woman in a hospital gown, her eyes dark pits, her mouth twisted in a silent scream. Then she was gone. The patient passed away later that night, and room 306 remained haunted. Story 2. The elevator that goes nowhere. Hospitals have restricted areas, floors that have been closed down, wings that are no longer in use. But sometimes those places are not as empty as they seem. One night, I was working in the ER when a new nurse came running up to me, pale and shaking. "The elevator took me to the wrong floor," she whispered. I frowned. "What do you mean?" She explained that she had gotten into the staff elevator to go up to the 4th floor. Instead, the elevator descended, down to the basement where the old morgue used to be. The doors opened to a pitch-black hallway, and standing in the middle of it was a figure. She couldn't move. The figure took a step forward, then another. Its feet didn't make a sound. Then the elevator doors shut, and she was taken back to the 1st floor. She refused to use that elevator ever again, and she wasn't the only one who had seen something lurking in the basement. Story 3. The nurse who never left every hospital has its legends. Ours was about a nurse named Margaret, who had worked there decades ago. She was dedicated to her patients, but one night a fire broke out in the East Wing. Margaret died trying to save her patients, but the stories say she never really left. Many of us have seen her, a woman in an old-fashioned nurse's uniform walking the halls at night. She checks on patients, tucks in blankets, and whispers comforting words. But when you look directly at her, she vanishes. One night, I was walking past the pediatric ward when I heard humming, a lullaby, soft and sweet. I turned the corner and saw a nurse bending over a child's bed, smoothing down the covers. My heart stopped. I recognized the uniform from old photographs. Margaret. She turned her head slightly, as if she sensed me, and then faded into nothing. The child's mother later told me she had felt someone touch her shoulder that night and whisper, "Everything will be okay." Story 4. The Whispering Walls. The next day I tried to brush it off. Lack of sleep and overactive imagination, there had to be an explanation. But deep down I knew what I had heard. I avoided that hallway as much as possible, taking the long way around whenever I could. But hospitals are busy places, and one night I found myself alone there again. The air was thick again, pressing against my skin like unseen hands. My breath came in short gasps, and I tried to move quickly. That's when the whispers returned. This time I listened. The voices overlapped, soft and pleading. "I caught fragments. They lied to us. Still here. Can't leave." Then a sharp whisper cut through the rest. "Look." I turned my head, my heart slamming against my ribs. There, at the end of the hallway, was a door I had never noticed before. It was old, different from the rest of the hospital's modern renovations. The paint was peeling, and the metal handle was rusted. A small window sat at eye level, but the glass was frosted and grimy. I stepped forward. As I reached for the handle, the whispers rose to a frantic pitch. The air turned ice cold. My fingers grazed the metal, and the door jerked open from the other side. I stumbled back as a rush of air hit me, thick with the scent of antiseptic and something else, something rotten. The room beyond was dark, too dark, as if light itself refused to enter. Then I saw it. A figure stood just inside the doorway, its shape barely visible. Tall, thin, arms hanging at unnatural angles, its head tilted toward me, and though I couldn't see its face, I felt its eyes locked onto mine. A hand, pale, bony, slid out of the darkness, reaching. "Help us," it whispered. The hallway lights flickered. A deep, rattling breath filled the space. I ran. But just before I turned the corner, I heard the door creak open wider, and from the darkness something laughed. Story 5. The Empty Bed. In the ICU, we often have terminal patients, people who are at the end of their lives. One patient, an elderly man, had been unresponsive for days. We expected him to pass at any moment. One night I walked past his room and stopped. He was sitting up in bed, staring at the corner of the room, as if listening to someone. His eyes were wide, almost fearful. I stepped inside. "Mr. Thompson," I whispered. He slowly turned his head toward me and whispered, "He's waiting." Chills ran down my spine. "Who?" But he just smiled, a strange, knowing smile, and lay back down. An hour later he passed away. The monitors never beeped. No alarms went off. He was just gone. Later that night, I walked past his empty room, and the chair in the corner where he had been staring was rocking back and forth. Story 6. The Morgue Visitor. Hospitals have places most people never see. The morgue is one of them. For most, it's just a room they know exists, but would rather not think about. But for the night security team, it was part of the job. They had to check it every shift, make sure everything was in order, no unauthorized personnel sneaking around, no doors left unlocked. Simple stuff usually. My co-worker, Jason, had been working security at St. Mary's Hospital for nearly 3 years. He wasn't the type to scare easily. He'd seen his fair share of unsettling things, grieving families, patients in distress, the occasional unhinged individual who needed to be escorted out. But nothing ever made him quit. Nothing ever shook him, until the night of the morgue visitor. It was just after 2 a.m. when Jason settled into the small security office near the emergency wing, sipping coffee and lazily scanning the cameras. Most of the hospital was quiet at that hour. The ER had its usual slow trickle of patients, but otherwise the hallways were empty. Then, movement on the monitors caught his attention. A woman in a hospital gown stood outside the morgue doors. She wasn't moving, just standing there staring at the doors. Her head was tilted slightly to one side, her hair hanging limp over her shoulders. The gown was standard issue, pale blue with a tiny repeating pattern, the kind all patients wore. Jason assumed she was confused, maybe a patient who had wandered out of her room. It wasn't uncommon for disoriented patients, especially the elderly or those on strong medication, to get lost. He grabbed his flashlight and keys and headed downstairs. The basement was always unnerving at night. The air was colder than in the rest of the hospital, and the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder in the silence. He turned the corner into the hallway leading to the morgue and immediately felt off. The hallway was empty. But when Jason looked back at the monitor on his handheld device, the woman was still there, standing in front of the morgue doors. His skin prickled. He swung his flashlight around, checking every corner, every shadow. There was no sign of her, no sound of footsteps, nothing. Jason hesitated, then walked up to the morgue doors and pressed the buzzer to request entry. The on-call morgue attendant, an older man named Bill, answered through the intercom. "Yeah? Hey, it's Jason from security. Did a patient just come through here?" A pause. Then, "No one's come through. Just me down here." Jason frowned. "You sure? I saw a woman standing right outside the doors on the cameras." "Well, she ain't here now." Jason exhaled slowly. "All right. Thanks, Bill." As he turned to leave, he checked the cameras again. The woman was gone. That was the moment something deep in his gut twisted. Jason returned to the security office and rewound the footage. The woman had been standing there for nearly 10 minutes, unmoving. Then, in the span of a single frame, she disappeared. 1 second she was there, the next gone. He felt a chill creep down his spine. He told himself it was a camera glitch, a trick of the light, something logical, but his hands were shaking as he sipped his coffee. Over the next few nights, Jason avoided the basement as much as he could. He still had to do his rounds, but he made sure to check the morgue cameras first before going down. Nothing unusual happened until the following Thursday, 2:14 a.m. The woman was back. Same spot, same hospital gown, same eerie stillness. Jason's heart pounded as he watched the screen. He didn't want to go down there. Every instinct screamed at him to stay put, but he had a job to do. He grabbed his flashlight and made his way to the basement again. This time, before turning the corner, he paused and listened. Silence. Steeling himself, he stepped forward. She was there. This time, Jason saw her with his own eyes. A woman in a hospital gown stood with her back to him, facing the morgue doors. Her feet were bare. Her arms hung limply at her sides. His throat went dry. "Ma'am?" he called, keeping his voice steady. She didn't move. He took a cautious step closer. "Ma'am, are you lost? Do you need help?" Still nothing. Jason's pulse thundered in his ears. He reached for his radio. "Control, I have a—" The woman twitched, just slightly, like a puppet whose strings had been jerked. Jason froze. Slowly, the woman turned her head, not her body, just her head, toward him. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken and dark. Her lips barely moved, but Jason swore he heard something, a whisper too soft to make out. Then she vanished. No fading, no stepping away.
Just gone.
The radio crackled in Jason's trembling hand. "Jason, you there?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. His legs finally unlocked, and he bolted up the stairs, his breath coming in sharp gasps. He quit a week later. But the story didn't end with Jason. The new security guard, Malik, heard about the morgue woman from whispers among the staff. He chalked it up to hospital ghost stories, until he saw the security footage himself. And then, one night, he saw her standing in the hallway. He didn't go downstairs. He just watched as she stood there, unmoving, until she disappeared. Other guards started seeing her too. Some nights she wasn't there at all. Other nights she'd appear at random hours, always staring at the morgue doors, always silent, always gone in the blink of an eye. A nurse, overhearing the guards talk about the morgue woman, dug into the hospital records out of morbid curiosity. What she found made her blood run cold. 10 years earlier, a woman named Eleanor Hayes had been admitted to St. Mary's for complications following a routine surgery. She was recovering well, until one night, she vanished from her hospital bed. Security footage from that night showed her wandering the halls in a daze, still in her hospital gown. The last recorded sighting of her was in the basement near the morgue. They never found her body. No official report explained what happened to Eleanor Hayes. Some believed she had somehow made her way outside and disappeared. Others thought she had been the victim of some terrible accident the hospital had covered up. But the night guards knew the truth. Eleanor never left, and on certain nights, if you watch the cameras long enough, you'll still see her, standing outside the morgue doors, waiting. Hospitals hold more than just the living. They hold memories, pain, suffering, and sometimes the spirits of those who never moved on. So the next time you visit a hospital late at night, pay attention. If you hear whispers in an empty hallway or feel a cold touch on your shoulder, don't ignore it, because some patients never check out. Do you believe in hospital ghosts? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've ever experienced something unexplainable, let us know, if you dare.